And there's probably going to be a couple second delay, but we should be live. I'm just waiting to see it on my screen. We're just going to chill for a bit as everything gets synced up. But yeah, I'm seeing us on YouTube. So I'll go ahead and go away from that screen. Bam, bam, bam. And let's see. Are people in here yet? We've got 24 waiting for the show to begin. I'm just going to restore the chat and pop out the window so that I have better access to it. All right, boom. We are live, motherfuckers. We are here to talk about Conan the Barbarian, the past, present, hopefully glorious future. And it's great to see so many familiar faces in there. And this is going to be a very interactive conversation. We want as many questions and statements and comments or just high fives or just bestial roars from the chat room as humanly possible. But this is a very important movie to me. My favorite words in the English language are dark adult fantasy. And when it comes to the source material or the movie, these are this is like the Mount Everest of dark adult fantasy in a lot of ways. And for this conversation, who better than the darkest adult that I know, Bill Teck, filmmaker extraordinaire and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu enthusiast. But Bill, welcome back to Geeking with James Hancock. Welcome back to Wrong Reel. Welcome back. It's great to see you online.
Hello, you fucking savages. That includes you, James, and everybody out there. I see Matthias already saying she's a Valkyrie, which is our theme.
You can expect us to quote that John Milius line from the commentary 1,000 times. We might just quote John Milius the entire live stream.
I'm good with that.
Well, before we start diving into Conan and all that stuff, tell people a little bit out there about some of the movies you've worked on and what you've got cooking in the oven right now as we wait for folks to kind of get caught up.
I'm working on a new film that I'm working with Bill Scurry and Rob Cotto, who you guys know from Wrong Reel fame. It's music related, and if you have a favorite musician, they're probably in it. Unless you like corny ass music, in which case, the hell with you. But if you have a favorite, he's probably in the movie or she's probably in the movie. And we're not going to say what it is just yet, but we've been working on it. It's going to be awesome. And then I'm a filmmaker and I make documentaries mostly. The last one was on Peter Bogdanovich, which is called One Day Since Yesterday, but everybody from Wrong Reel knows about that one already. But I'm real proud of it. And,
yeah, it's a dynamite movie. I mean, documentaries about film history is like one of my favorite subcategories or subgenres of documentaries. And at times I prefer to watch documentaries about movies over the actual movies themselves. And I watched a great documentary prepping for this episode, the John Milius one. And I also watched Conan the Barbarian Unchained, which is a great behind the scenes documentary. So yeah, I'm always down to watch more behind the scenes documentaries. So thank you for making one of the good ones.
Thank you very much. I love the Milius documentary. If you love Conan, if you love just John Milius, just a great two-fisted storyteller, that is an amazing doc. It was made by the guys that do the behind-the-scenes stuff on the Kevin Smith movies. So if you ever watch any DVD extras, those are the guys that made it. And I loved it, man. And I found out so much about, Milius, who's one of the reasons we're here today. Because he's one of the reasons Conan is so fucking awesome.
Well, we're going to pause real quick and say hello to some folks who are in the chat. I see we got Victor Rodriguez. What is happening? He's been on Wrong Reel a million times. We got the great Bill Scurry, who talked about anime with me last week. We got Fred Schaefer, Jake Lindberg. We got Stevan Daljev, if I'm saying his name correctly. And Morat, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. That is quite a mouthful. It's got some letters that I don't know how to pronounce, but when it comes to the Lamentation of Enemies Women by Crom, I agree with all your sentiments, even if I can't pronounce your last name. But let's start easing into this character.
What is best in life? And to hear the lamentations of the women.
Exactly. Well, let's go back to the early days of Conan. Probably let's go even like pre-Conan. What do you know about the kind of the dark days or the primordial soup that gave birth to him? Because it seems like partially kind of influenced by H.P. Lovecraft, partially influenced by Robert E. Howard's earlier writings on Kull the Conqueror, who never quite took off in the late 20s. But how much exposure have you had to the earliest origins of the character?
I'm a Howard fan, so I went back after seeing the movie. I went back, and I was 13. My mom took me to go see it. I know your dad took you to go see it when you were like 5.
5, and in the theater, I was horrified and spellbound and awe-inspired all at once.
Well, that was my reaction too. And even though I was a fan of the genre, Starlog and all that, but I went back and read the Howard stories, and I've studied a little bit about him and, how he grew up and so forth. And he was a guy that was, he was an early boxer, kind of a manly man. And who knows what issues he had going on because he took his own life so young at 30.
He's 30, yeah.
You know, after caring for his mom. But Howard was what got me about the stories was how well written they were. But first of all, it was the first sort of fantasy world that was built like this, where everything, talk about world building, this predates Tolkien. It's an extraordinary world that he envisioned. And yes, I'm sure he was influenced by Lovecraft. And didn't they correspond a little bit?
They did.
Even?
He read the story Rats in the Walls, which is one of my favorite Lovecraft stories. And you can see a direct influence from Rats in the Walls on my favorite Robert E. Howard story, Scarlet Citadel, where you had this idea of like worlds that existed before recorded history, where, like, you know, Conan's pre-recorded history, but even in the world of Conan, there are eras that are eons in the past filled with nameless horrors and wizards and demons and gods like Set and that sort of thing. And I just love the idea, like in the Scarlet Citadel, that you have this bottomless pit of nameless horrors beneath this castle that's been built upon those foundations. And you can see a direct influence. And just the way he describes black magic, the way he describes some of these ceremonies, the way he describes ancient beings kind of writhing in their tombs from millennia ago, it's very Lovecraftian. And yeah, I mean, Lovecraft created his own mythos, and obviously Robert E. Howard created a mythos as well. And you can trace characters like Thulsa Doom back to the Cull stories, because Thulsa Doom was more of a Cull villain than he was like a Conan villain. Conan had this other wizard, Thothamon, who's also equally cool, who appears in the very first short story, The Phoenix on the Sword. But that whole era of pulp fiction and just writing for Weird Tales and Weird Magazine, all those different magazines that are available at the time, I find these stories delightful. And I bought this bad boy back in like 2003 or 4.
I have that book.
That was my first exposure. And then my brother, when he saw me become such a fanatic, my brother who works in publishing, he gave me this whopper, which is the complete chronicles, everything written by Robert E. Howard. And I find them endlessly rewarding. I was reading some last night, and I just fell into them all over again.
I was reading, to catch up on this episode too, I was rereading my favorite, which is The Tower of the Elephant. The language that Howard used was so crazy. I just want to read you some quotes while we're on Robert E. Howard. These are from, literally, these quotes are within 4 pages of each other. Civilized men are more discourteous than savages because they know they can be impolite without having their skull split, as a general thing. That's people say that all the time, you know, in armed societies, a civil society. Howard's saying this in 1932, 34. And in this 2 pages later, it sums up Twitter perfectly. Because nobody can hit you in the face with a battle axe. So of course you can say whatever you want. I always say that's why those reality shows about the UFC guys in a room or the WWE guys in a room, that's why those reality shows aren't that good, because everybody's fairly courteous, except one lunatic. People are courteous when they know they're going to get bashed in the head. But if I may, Howard then says 2-3 pages later, there's always a way if the desire be coupled with courage. So this is like really quotable, really good shit. And it's like just pages away. His gods were simple and understandable. Kron was their chief, and he lived on a great mountain, whence he sent forth dooms and death. Just the language is fucking fantastic, and it's addictive. And the further you get into the stories, some are better than others, but the further you get into the stories, the cooler it gets.
Yes, some of the stories you can tell he wrote for cash, because as the character got popular and he was desperate for money, he knew he could just provide certain ingredients and it would sell. But in his best stories, there's like an ethos, there's a philosophy, there's a code. And that's what I find so endlessly rewarding. There's plenty of fantasy out there that's kind of interchangeable or derivative, but Robert E. Howard created his own singular universe with a singular storytelling voice. And the best of those stories, I mean, whether you're talking about like Black Queen of the Coast or Phoenix on the Sword,
Red Nails,
or Tower of the Elephant, which a lot of ingredients made it into Oliver Stone's script as well as into the movie. It's just, if you sit down, you're taking a dump or you're having your coffee or whatever, you can rip through these things in about 10 or 15 minutes, and they're absolutely delightful. And I feel like it's a crime that we've never actually seen like a show based on the existing Robert E. Howard stories. A couple of years ago, there was a writer who tried to do that with Amazon. Amazon was basically looking for another Game of Thrones. And they've got Lord of the Rings and Wheel of Time underway. But there is a writer by the name of, hang on, I've got it right here, Ryan Condal, who did the show Colony, and he just wanted to adapt the original material across like 1 or 2 seasons. And Amazon came close and then bailed at the last second. So you can blame Jennifer Salk for that. But it's just, I feel like it's just all the materials there. It's ready and waiting to be dusted off and resurrected. And I feel like it would be great counter programming to a lot of the existing shows that we see today.
I think you're right. And I think they lend themselves perfectly. One of the most exciting things was the fact that these stories were then repackaged and put together with those great Frazetta covers. And that's what kind of gave the character that extended life. And then that Roy Thomas, when it was handed off to Marvel, Roy Thomas was smart enough to seek out the rights to those stories and then adopt them in comic book form. So even when they stopped,
he wrote Conan for 10 years. Roy Thomas from 1970 and 1980 was writing Conan, and then he was also writing the more R-rated version, Savage Sword of Conan. But 10 years of Conan stories, that's bananas.
It is crazy, and also to think that when Lance went out of business and stopped publishing the Conan stories, the only place you could see Conan that kept him alive was those stories that Roy was doing at Marvel, and also in Savage Sword of Conan, not just the comic book, but the black and white magazine style comic.
Yeah, that's the one. I prefer the Savage Sword of Conan just because you get all this great like Boris Vallejo covers and things like that. But real quick, since we're on the subject of this early material, John Arminio, who's in the chat, sent me this question last night, and he said, "Greetings, Mr. Hancock. I would just like to pose a question for your Conan live stream tomorrow. If there was one Robert E. Howard story you'd like to see directly adapted to film or animation, what would it be?" So I'll let you answer that question first.
Which one would I want to see?
Yeah, if you could see it in animation or in live action.
I might want to say Red Nails.
Ooh, very nice. That's the last one that Robert E. Howard ever published. I mean, that's from the first appearance of Valeria.
Yeah. Well, that's probably what she's a Valkyrie.
She's incredible.
That might be it. And also to answer some of for Arminio, I want to say that I sent him a Cuban coffee maker, and I'm having some right now, and I have to teach him how to make this on YouTube later.
Very nice.
But also, I wanted to answer Scurry's questions. I don't know who that was behind me, if that was the dog walker or Bill, because I'm so focused on James's blue eyes.
That was like Conan, who was hovering behind Robert E. Howard when he was writing his stories. Apparently, this is the myth, this is the legend, but he would write late at night, and he could feel Conan standing behind him with a battle axe. And if he didn't write with great intensity and ferocity and quickly, then Conan would just take him out. So he'd write during the night with Conan's specter haunting him. And he wrote most of the best stories very quickly in a short period of time. And toward the end of his life, he wasn't even writing Conan stories anymore. But it was like for just a couple of years there, he just cranked out a ton of them. But I wanted to do a few more hellos to people in the chat. See Adam Rakoff, my producing partner, who's going to come on soon. He's been recovering from Voldemort disease, and we're not allowed to say it on YouTube, but he's getting back on firm footing. We've got Duncan the Small, aka Duncan the Tall, from George R.R. Martin. We got Gary Worthington from the UK.
You got my brother Moose.
Moose Matson, your brother from another, and Moose. He's been posing in Wrong Reel T-shirts with swords and headbands, and I think nobody's more excited for the show than Moose, other than perhaps maybe the great Tony Stella, who is in the chat as well. Tony Stella did the luscious, glorious art for this live stream, and it's because of Tony Stella that we're doing this live stream. We talked about it briefly like a year ago, and we kind of forgot about it. And Tony just kept saying, "When's the Conan live stream? When's the Conan live stream?" And so he made it happen by sheer force of will.
Well, it's just like that Howard quote. There was always a way if desire be coupled with courage.
Absolutely.
But Stella, I can't believe I got my name on a Tony Stella poster. That is like the coolest thing ever. Thank you, Tony. You've
made it. That's a red panties night. Oh, we got Paul Moore, an artist from Scotland. He draws comics, and he's a big Conan fan. We got John Cribbs. Very cool to see tons of familiar faces. But I'm going to answer John Arminio's question. I'm going to go with Scarlet Citadel, because Scarlet Citadel, what's a short story, it does have a giant narrative, whereas a lot of the other short stories, as great as they are, feel like vignettes that could be part of a movie. But Scarlet Citadel, it's a war. Conan, it's later in life. Conan gets taken down by this horrible wizard, gets imprisoned, and while he's imprisoned in this Lovecraftian dungeon, finds another wizard, saves him, and then manages to get revenge. But when it comes to Conan's suspicion and hostility towards the dark arts, it's all there. When it comes to great battles with Conan overcoming overwhelming odds, it's all there. But also you get to see that he's not just a barbarian, he's a statesman, and he actually leads in a really fair way. And it's interesting seeing that different side of him, because everyone always thinks, oh, well, he's a plunderer, he's a thief, he's a brawler, he likes to get drunk. But there's so many different dimensions to his character. He's actually got like a philosophy to him. And while he might come from the wintry north of Samaria, or Samaria, however you choose to pronounce it, he's got a lot of depths and layers to him. And I feel like he's like an onion. You can keep peeling back the layers, and Scarlet Citadel really tackles that really well.
I think that's a great one. That's a great pick. Great choice, man.
Holy fuck. All right, Mara Lee is going berserk. Mara, you are very, very nice to make that not one but two donations so far. I love the donations, but during a time where the whole world is in crisis, nobody should feel compelled to make donations. But let's read it. In honor of the great late fabulous actor Max von Sydow, who played King Osric, as well as one of my favorite character actors, Blood Raven, the three-eyed crow in Game of Thrones, James Earl Jones as Thulsa Doom. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about this movie, is that while you've got, for your heroes, you've got these athletes, you've got a dancer, a surfer, and a bodybuilder. On the other hand, you've got these world-class actors like James Earl Jones and Max von Sydow fleshing things out. And I know that Arnold learned so much from James Earl Jones as well as Max von Sydow. And he talked about that scene where Osric's saying, like, lions ate him. And, and he's like really just screaming and roaring and going nuts. Arnold was just in awe. He'd never been close to like a real thespian who could roar in a kingly fashion. And for Arnold, that was a huge eye-opener, getting exposed to such a legendary actor. So I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about Max von Sydow's performance as King Osric. Such a badass, one of the all-time greats, from Bergman to Conan to Game of Thrones to The Exorcist. How can you beat Max von Sydow?
Oh, I loved him so much. Well, the Hannah and Her Sisters, Victory, Flash Gordon, those are like the ones that
hell yeah, Ming the Merciless.
He's just a brilliant actor, man. Brilliant actor. When he looks at Barbara Hershey and in Hannah and Her Sisters, Lee, you've been kissed tonight. I mean, the guy, he's spectacular.
Yeah, he's so good. Oh, another donation, and there's a donation, Kyle Reardon, who just finished his first feature film. Kyle Reardon, when he was 18, started coming on Wrong Reel. He was in high school, and now he's in his early 20s, and he's making movies and living in LA and doing his thing. So we've watched Kyle Reardon go from film fan, working as an extra on the Ghostbusters 2016 film, to now being a director in his own right. So watching his ascent and evolution has been an absolute thrill.
I'm really jacked up to see Kyle's movie. Kyle, absolutely. Let me know, dude. I'm so there, And
here's a donation from Bill Scurry. What is your favorite non-Conan yet Conan-esque type media or franchise? Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to have to go with something fiction-based, probably Joe Abercrombie's series. I've read the first 5 so far, but for people who like Robert E. Howard, there's less dark kind of like black magic, because this is a period where medieval times is kind of phasing into the industrial age. But this book, The Heroes, is my favorite. It's basically the Battle of Gettysburg, like the book, The Killer Angels, but done as medieval fantasy, where you have Vikings and slightly more civilized warriors fighting for this hill. And it just absolutely blew my mind. And I was in a state of euphoria while reading that. So, Bill, yeah, excellent question. I would say Joe Abercrombie's First Law series. So far, it's been 7 novels and 1 collection of short stories, and the 8th novel is coming out this September. Teck, any strong feelings on other franchises that are similar?
No, while you were answering, I was trying to think of a good answer, and all I could think about was your shirt, which someone's complimenting you on.
Arnold is numero uno.
That's the shirt he wears in Pumping Iron?
Absolutely. When he's smoking a weed and he's smoking a joint and like eating a piece of chicken, and
so then every time that I'm doing the pump, it's like I'm coming. So then this is I'm pumping all day, so it's like I'm coming all the time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's start digging into. All right. So, and John Cripps says, "The Thing in the Crypt is so awesome. The L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter stories are more than worthy of Robert E. Howard. My one grievance against that period is that they were re-editing or rewriting some of Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard's actual original texts were out of print for a really long time. However, if not for L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter, Robert E. Howard might have been forgotten, because it's their editions that had those glorious Frank Frazetta covers. And those covers are they're chocolate for the eyeballs. I used to have them all over my walls back in college, but they've never lost their intensity or power for me. But the Frost Giant's daughter painting that he did, it's just one of my all-time favorites.
That's why we remember Conan. I don't think you can underestimate the importance of Frazetta's work. I've seen you with your Frazetta T-shirt on, and I myself have gotten to purchase some paintings from Frazetta's granddaughters or daughters, and it's like an honor because Conan in the books is a sinewy, muscular guy, but he's not this brutish barbarian. Well, we think of Conan, we don't think of necessarily the way Howard described him, but more the way Frazetta painted him.
I mean, Tower of the Elephant, he's like a late teen, basically naked, except for a loincloth and sandals and a sword, just walking through town, just chilling, just doing his thing. He's very lithe. He's like a big cat.
He's like a big cat. He's like a panther, and that's the most comfortable way to walk around. Everybody knows that.
Absolutely.
But there's a quote from Frazetta which says, he says, I didn't read any of it. He said this in Spectre magazine, I think. He said, I drew it my way. It was really rugged, and it caught on. I didn't care about what people thought. People who bought the books never complained about it. They probably didn't read them either. He was saying people were just buying them for the covers. Obviously, there's a lot of Howard fans, myself among them, and yes, L. Sprague and Lynn, they helped keep that legend going, and they were worthy. But I think the covers really set the tone, and that's what they were adapting when they cast Arnold. They cast somebody that looked like the covers, and it really fed into that whole in the 1970s, that fantastical world and 60s really when he started that Frazetta was painting. There's nothing like that. And also just the way he drew muscles, the way he drew women, just the curves and the shapes and the
all
hardness.
based on his wife. His wife was one of his most frequent models for his work.
He's a spectacular artist, and for so long, because it was like on Molly Hatchet album covers, and it was like kind of people were like, "Oh, it's kind of corny." And I'm glad that things have turned around to like, no, it's gorgeous. Not all fine art is hung in a museum, although there is a Frazetta museum. Obviously.
Yeah, I mean, quick shout out to so many artists who have put their fingerprints on the character in the 70s, especially with the Savage Sword of Conan covers. You've got like Earl and Norham doing these gorgeous covers, and you got Boris Vallejo covers. I met Boris Vallejo at a cafeteria in Midtown, and he was there with Julie Bell. Julie Bell was not only a model for him, but also one of his most frequent collaborators and a painter in her own right. And I saw them, I was like, oh my God, you're Boris Vallejo. So you must be Julie Bell. I was like, I love what y'all do. And I just went completely berserk, and they were all smiles and couldn't have been nicer. But I absolutely love and adore all this stuff. But we're 20 minutes in. We haven't really gotten into the movie yet. So maybe as much as I would love to stay with Robert E. Howard and the comics in that era, I think we just have to force ourselves to start talking about the movie. So obviously,
that won't be a big effort at all because it's amazing. There's no movie like it.
Yeah, I mean, Roy Thomas, he basically deserves a huge amount of credit for keeping the character alive. But what's funny is how little John Milius and Arnold Schwarzenegger knew about this character. John Milius was totally oblivious, and so was Arnold. But it was Oliver Stone who read the stories, read the comics, and wrote this crazy early draft. And the 1978 draft is still available online. And there's a lot of it that makes it into the movie, especially like Conan's prayer to Crom before the big battle at the end, and there's certain like the attack on the village, but he's pulling from a lot of Kull the Conqueror as well. But it's a post-apocalyptic landscape. The beginning of the story, you see like all of Europe collapsing and rebuilding, and like the lands heaving and swelling. But when John Milius and Arnold came on board, John Milius obviously decided to take it back to like a pagan pre-dawn history, and he was pulling in things about like Genghis Khan, and he pulled things from like Alexander Nevsky, the Eisenstein film. He was pulling from a variety of sources, but slowly but surely, this film starts to take shape. And I feel like while a lot of Robert E. Howard purists will argue that this movie betrays a lot of Robert E. Howard's vision because of all the different ingredients that John Milius is pulling in, I feel like as a work of art, it's very true to itself, and it's got its own philosophy, and it's got its own style and its own tone. And when it comes to dark adult fantasy, you can count on a couple of fingers how many good movies there are, and I feel like this is the GOAT.
Well, it's one of those magic moments in cinema where everything comes together. So the production design by Ron Cobb is perfect. The music by Basil Polidori, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, is perfect. The cinematography is perfect. The screenplay, a Stone screenplay, always is great because it gives when he's at odds with the director philosophically, and I can't think of two guys more opposed philosophically.
Oliver Stone, total lefty, Vietnam vet, and then you have like John Milius, who's kind of right wing or at least like libertarian, but who never fought, but dreamed of combat.
That's what makes when it works. Like Scarface is another one where I think that De Palma's ideas are at odds with Stone's. That tension makes it awesome, and I think that does inform this Conan script as well. And then you have this mixture of like you said, athletes and kind of neophyte actors God, you Sandal Bergman. She was already a wonderful actress, but she was mostly a dancer.
Yeah,
Arnold,
all that jazz, the Bob Fosse film, where she's just incredible in that scene where it's basically about people having sex on a plane in the sky, and it's intense. Like Bob Fosse was always leaning into the sexual ingredients when it came to musicals, but that one sequence and all that jazz it's an eye opener.
It is definitely an eye opener, and so Milius saw that sequence and said, "She's a Valkyrie. She's got to be in the picture." And you have Jerry, the surfer, who is
Jerry Lopez, absolutely.
Who he's new to acting.
Big Wednesday. He's dubbed in this, so he's not much of an actor. He actually kind of talks just like a normal guy. But for Subutai, who was created for the film because Milius was such a Genghis Khan freak, he's like, I need to have like one Mongolian, so they created Subutai just out of his imagination,
which is awesome. And he does have it's funny because he has that Genghis Khan originally said that great quote where Conan says, what is best in life, to crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of the wind. Apparently that was Genghis Khan who said that. And he gives a line to Conan, and it looks like Khan might be in the background there. It's a weird place where Conan is when he's asked that. But you have Subutai, which I wanted to introduce myself today by saying I'm Subutai, archer and thief.
Yeah.
Great.
Who are you?
And so that mixture, then you have Von Sydow, you have James Earl Jones, you have Mako, and you put these guys together, or maybe it's Mako, but you put them all together, and you have this amazing combination of like brilliant production design, brilliant directing, great actors, neophyte actors, a great score, everything coming together in this magical way that does happen. I don't think it ever happened for Milius in any of his other movies. I love John Milius, but I don't think there's anything like Conan.
I mean, his script for Apocalypse Now is obviously legendary, and I love how like he came with the expression on Apocalypse Now because all the hippies when he was at USC had like this Nirvana Now button. He turned it sideways and turned the peace sign into a plane and changed it to Apocalypse Now. And obviously, I mean, that screenplay was dramatically changed, but he was nominated for an Oscar. I'm a big fan of his movie for Dillinger. I'm a big fan of Big Wednesday.
Wind in the Lion.
Yeah, Wind in the Lion. And as a kid, I saw Red Dawn 1,000 times. I was just the perfect age to just eat it up. But Conan's that is the movie where all of his influences, all of his tastes, all of his powers as a storyteller, they all get stirred together to the most intoxicating brew imaginable.
It's also benefits from the fact that they're filming it far away. They're in Spain, and they're just creating this dreamland. And then thrust into that dreamland, people that look like they've walked out of a dream. Like nobody looks like Sandal Bergman and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Or James Earl Jones. Like John Milius wanted him to look like a race that no longer exists. So you have James Earl Jones, but with long straight hair and piercing blue eyes. And it's such an interesting combination. But just while since I mentioned him, saw this hysterical story about James Earl Jones. He's talking about all the snakes on the set and how much he loved them because he was used to them. When he was training for the army, he had to live with the snake, like had to keep it in his clothes. He had to take care of a snake at all times for like weeks and weeks and weeks. And at the end of this training session, you had to eat it. And so he was already very familiar with snakes and so on and so forth. But who better to play Thulsa Doom than James? I think James Earl Jones is better as Thulsa Doom than he is as Darth Vader.
Oh, he's a spectacular actor, so good in everything. But what fucking branch of the army is that?
He told that story.
I've never heard of that.
I think it's the Conan the Barbarian Unchained documentary. He tells that story, and of course he's telling the story with that perfect diction and perfect eloquence. And then of course at the end we ate it. I was like, whoa!
I don't know, man. I'd like to ask him if that's true or not. But he is a spectacular actor, and he brings such gravitas to the part. And it was so genius of Milius to cast him. Like, okay, he's James Earl Jones. Don't just put a disembodied voice in there. Let's see the fucking actor. And it's so groovy. I think one of the reasons he also chose to make it Thulsa Doom is that Thulsa Doom really was a sorcerer and really could turn into a snake, as opposed to the
and he
other.
Had like the skull face and things like that. And Thulsa Doom. He's in the Oliver Stone script. His powers are just running amok in a lot of ways. And at the very end, like Set comes out of the ground and like pulls his dead body into the ground. I mean, the black magic is taken to these crazy, prohibitively expensive extremes that I get why a lot of them had to be abandoned.
Yeah, and it was interesting watching that movie in the theater. And you were like really, really young, so you may not remember, but I remember sitting there with my mom. And when you go see an Arnold movie at that time, whether you were going to see Commando, whether you were going to see Predator, those are years later. But everybody in the movie was a bodybuilder. He was still in the movie theater. He was still like a cult hero. but he wasn't like a mainstream hero. It wasn't Twins yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Like when they had the first test screenings in Vegas, it was all like these Hell's Angels and all these bodybuilding enthusiasts that showed up. And they said like when he first raises his head from pushing the wheel of pain, the whole theater just erupted. But real quick, I just want to read some of the comments from the crowd. I want to get the crowd in on the action. So Adam Rakoff says, after rewatching Conan last night, I noticed that Jerry Goldsmith's opening music for Total Recall echoes the beginning of Basil Poledouris' opening title music. Yeah, I mean, I think Basil Poledouris' music for this is the most epic kind of primordial pagan battle music ever written for a movie. And I know Prokofiev wrote great stuff for Alexander Nevsky, but I mean, I used to run stairs listening to this soundtrack. You just feel like you can run through walls, but it's got like stirring moments, like when they're running through like through the desert, and when Subutai comes in to rescue Conan when he's hanging on the tree of woe. Every time, there's so many different themes. It's not just like the one theme you like. There's like 7 or 8 different themes. And also, John Cribbs says, Frazetta, Roy Thomas, Barry Windsor Smith, DeCamp and Lynn, Paul Anderson, Carpenter, Turtledove, but so many people to thank for the continuing legacy of Conan. Yeah, there have been a lot of great custodians over the years, even as recent as like people like Frank Cho doing glorious covers and things like that. There have been so many people who have taken that baton and carried it forward. And some people have been poor custodians, some people have been great, but there's a reason why the character's still around nearly 100 years later.
That is hard to believe. It's 85 years since Conan was created.
Murat says, as mentioned, the authentic depiction of Conan seems more in line with Barry Windsor Smith's Conan than Buscema's. However, what set the graphic tone was Buscema's perception. I think of all the artists who have drawn him on a regular basis on the page, John Buscema's version is my favorite. He just looks so brooding. And this idea of Conan being full of mirth and melancholy, he captures that so well. And so John Buscema, I grew up looking at his comics and looking at his art, so he's got to be one of my all-time faves as well.
Top 5 artists for me of all time, John, and his Conan is without equal. Without a doubt. But revisiting what you were just talking about, Basil Poledouris, and that theme, when they're running through over the fields, him and Subutai, I think that part is called wifing. I don't know, I think. But my favorite part, besides it's a great, you talk about a workout, that's a leg day. Anvil of Crom is a great leg day workout. But I will say this, Kitchen, the orgy, which is the waltz that's playing. There's a fucking waltz. If you want to do the sex mixtape, you put on Kitchen, the orgy, and that leads into Ravel's Bolero. This is a free tip for everybody out there. You feel free to bind yourself with some weird Conan type things if you're into it. But that is the ultimate mixtape. That into Ravel's Bolero.
If you and I ever host a cannibalistic orgy devoted to the worship of Set, we will make sure to have the music that is appropriate for the circumstances. That scene, talk about like scenes that don't get included in mainstream Hollywood movies. And this is a $17 million production. It's a big budget, and it was a modest hit. But the idea of this was like a mainstream R-rated movie coming out of Hollywood, where you have a vat of soup, split pea in hand, as they were jokingly referring to it on the set, where you have bodies all over the walls that are clearly been dismembered and hacked up. You got girls nibbling on fingers as they serve the soup to people who are just writhing in sexual ecstasy. And then you've got these 3 warriors with that beautiful camouflage that actually kind of works. They disappear when they're sitting still. There's nothing like it in the history of movies, where you've got Sandal Bergman writhing like a snake just when she slides across the floor to light the curtain with the candle, or Subutai doing all that badass choreography, or Arnold just flexing as he holds the sword down in front of him when he sees his 2 nemesis from his childhood who were there when his mother was beheaded. It is true epic dark fantasy, and it just makes the veins on my arms like swell and get engorged when I see it.
That is 100% true. And Matthias was pointing out that theme, wifing, was the love theme when Conan and Valeria sleep together. Thank you for that. That's 100% right. So I don't know the name of the one where they're running across the fields, but it's another piece of music. It is like a little ballet. It's so beautiful the way they do that when they're all kind of coming in there. And I remember watching it in the theater and just being totally like wigged out. And the whole theater, all the bodybuilders and everybody was just so into the movie. It was pretty cool.
Well, quick shout out from Tony Stella, who without him we would not be here. He says, Conan's changing outfits are so important. The war paint's another detail only Milius could have added. Agreed. It's just all of his wish fulfillment of because he always wanted to be a general, like in Vietnam. He used to laugh and say his fantasy was to be flying in a plane, dropping fire on children, and then he would laugh. So you never quite knew if he was serious or not. But he wanted to be Colonel Kurtz, basically. So just he got to put all those fantasies into this movie. And then Tony says, also the most Masaki Kobayashi. Kobayashi is such a huge influence on this. I mean, Qui-Gon's one of the best horror movies ever to come out of Japan. But when you're seeing Conan having all the runes drawn on his face as they're trying to save his life, so it's one of those things where usually I'm always like, a movie needs to be faithful to the source material or go to hell. But this is a movie that's faithful to the spirit in a lot of ways, but pulls in so many different ingredients. And I feel like it's a rare example of how you can actually bring in a variety of influences and enhance and kind of build upon what's already there. I feel like it's a great kind of teachable moment on how to adapt something, but still make it feel personal, still make it feel yours.
It's completely a creation of Milius and the people in the movie. That's the reason why it lives on, because he didn't stick to it. It's not a traditional movie either. There's no 3-act structure in that movie. There are chapters in it, almost like a book, and it just doesn't follow a traditional narrative. Like, he dies, he's brought back to life. Valeria dies. There's a climax, but there's another climax after the climax. It's a really strange movie, but it seems to just. And it looked like De Laurentiis didn't fuck with it too much. Like, it just came straight out of the pipeline of Milius's brain.
Dino apparently was tough at first and didn't really like Arnold, because Arnold, first time he was brought into his office to meet him with John Milius, he said, how come such a small guy and he's such a large desk? And Dino was not amused. And Arnold clearly just enjoyed like fucking with him and making fun of him. And in the commentary at one point, when they're talking about the split pea and hand soup, Arnold does this like impersonation of Dino, and at one point he says, you're gonna gross out the people. Like, and you just felt like Arnold was not impressed by Dino, who was this larger than life charismatic figure, worked with Fellini, had been producing movies since he was 19. He was always wanted to make another Star Wars, and made Flash Gordon, made Dune, obviously produced Blue Velvet, one of the all-time great producers. And I got to work with him a bit on Hannibal, and he's just a fascinating character. But apparently once Dino was on board, he gave them all the resources they needed. Like John Milius says in the commentary, the movie would not have been made better by more money. We had all the money that we asked for. We had all the money that we needed. We made precisely the movie that we wanted to make. And Dino, when it came to marketing and his flair and just like building up anticipation, Dino got 100% on board. So I think Dino deserves a huge amount of credit for what a mainstream success it became.
I think for once, Dino had a movie that looked like the movie he set out to make. I knew he was trying to make another movie with Dune, and I think he was trying to make another movie with Flash Gordon, which wound up very funny and very campy, very cute, but I don't think that's what he thought he was going to get. Here, I think they gave him what he thought they were going to give him, and he went to town with it, and that movie just works on so many levels. And you mentioned the commentary. That's another reason that I think the movie lives on and on and on and on. I thought that was a secret thing with me and my friends. We discovered it in 1998 around the rise of the DVD player.
There was an extended version of the movie that came out on DVD, and that's where the commentary track first popped up.
I remember me and my buddy sitting in my house, and we were listening to it, and we were like, this is the craziest fucking commentary we've ever heard in our life. We thought it was our own little private joke. Lo and behold, it's a huge cult thing. You go on YouTube, there are like greatest hits of the commentary. This is a huge thing for people. We did not know this. I didn't know this. I thought I was alone in the world and thinking this is the greatest commentary ever.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Brian Rule, who's been on the Wrong Reel before, he came out to stay with me in LA when I was producing this low budget horror film called Dead Doll back in 2003, and we just popped it in. And he had warned me in advance it was kind of funny, but I had no idea what to expect. And I basically sat there for 2 hours screaming in maniacal laughter, like just weird little things when he's like, the whole movie has to do with that. And like the way he like emphasizes that, like you feel like you're just getting to have 2 hours of unfiltered Arnold. And this is how he talks, this is how he acts. And sometimes this humor is a little mean-spirited, but it always makes you laugh. Like he's like, and if you believe that, you'll believe that Richard Simmons Jr. is running around. And
off the bat, he's so crazy. He's like, look at that kid. He looks funny. What's wrong with him? His cheeks are rosy.
He's like,
does he have lipstick?
Is he wearing lipstick? What is that? I mean, and also when he starts laughing when the trainer does that spinning back kick to kick the guy in the stomach. He's like, he was laughing, but he did not laugh for long. And it's wonderful, beautiful stuff.
Or the candor when he's like, hey, look at this. So I get laid a lot in this movie.
Yeah. But also you can tell he doesn't remember the movie at all. He's completely transfixed by the story. And he keeps saying like, oh, exactly. Like he keeps thinking he needs to like narrate what's on the screen.
And he's like, yeah, we're running.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, this is a commentary. People are well aware of the fact, but yeah, it's a shame that Milius and he never got to make more movies. Maybe now's as good a time as any to talk about how Oliver Stone envisioned this originally to be a series of movies like James Bond, where Arnold would come back every couple of years and would do another one. which I think it's the way it should have been envisioned. It's the way that it should have been done. But then you have Conan the Destroyer, which is a PG movie made for kids. And Arnold had such a bad experience on that. I mean, he was contractually obliged to do it. But if it hadn't been for Conan the Destroyer, perhaps he would have come back sooner to do Conan the King with any number of different filmmakers who might have been a good fit. But I guess, as Tony Stella said in the past, because we only have the one good movie, it makes it all the more special. Like with James Bond, we got a couple of really good ones from different periods. But with Conan, it's just the one movie. And so it just makes it that much more special that like all these different ingredients and forces came together for this one precise moment to give us a movie that is singular in vision and totally consistent with its own philosophy.
It is a heartbreaker for me that they didn't get to make more movies, especially because when a director meets their actor that's going to be their muse, whether it's Kyle MacLachlan and David Lynch or Scorsese and De Niro, whoever, and it seemed like finally these two guys were aligned. They were aligned in their thinking, Milius and Schwarzenegger, and they were aligned in their attitude, and they were just like, it was the perfect guy. Like, why didn't they make more movies? He's going off and doing Return of the King, is it, with Nick Nolte, and it's like, Nick Nolte's cool. He ain't Arnold. And it breaks your heart in much the way that Arnold didn't get to do the Crusades with Paul Verhoeven. That would have been awesome. That's another great matchup. So that does break my heart. But we have that movie. I detest Conan the Destroyer with all my heart and spirit. I love Grace Jones. I love Will Chamberlain.
Yeah, Grace Jones's romantic advice is very special.
Oh, she's awesome. And
grab him.
Well, it works. I mean, look.
Age 8, I saw it in the theater, and I was like, "Oh, this is tons of fun. I love it." And then I saw it on VHS a couple times, and then as I got older, I started to realize, oh, they completely took everything that was cool and barbaric and dark and savage and primordial about the first, and laid it aside and tried to make a fun family adventure movie. And so, while it has its moments that are enjoyable, if that was the only Conan movie that existed, we would not be sitting here 38 years later talking about it. It's because of Conan the Barbarian that we're still here talking about.
That's exactly right. And it's corny and it looks cheap as hell. It has no sets. It has like in a desert, that sidekick guy, I want to crawl inside the screen and just hit him with a wet hammer.
I love this Tony Stella quote when he says, when John Milius told Dino De Laurentiis, if we don't cast Arnold, we would have to build him. And it's true. You can't make a Conan movie without this rare special creature. Now, if you wanted to make Conan, you basically should just do like a CGI Conan to get him right, because you're never going to find an actor who can really get it right. I mean, Jason Momoa, he's fine, but that movie, the less said about it, the better. But I'm just going through some of the comments. Tristan Lofting, opinions on Destroyer. Yeah, once again, it's as Robert Cotto would say, it's fine.
It's fine.
But it's not an iconic seminal film.
It's so not fine. And the one cool thing about it is that Fleischer instructed Arnold to get back to competition bodybuilding shape. He wanted him to look like the Frazetta Conan. And in the Milius film, he trimmed down a little. He's jacked out of his mind, but he's a little bit lithe, so he matches Sandahl and Jerry a little bit more. But in this one, he told him go crazy. So many of the iconic photographs that we look at when we think of Conan are from Conan the Destroyer, where he's back to competition shape, huge and defined Arnold.
I prefer kind of the slightly kind of puffier version that we see in Conan, because it looks more functional. It looks like a guy who spent 10 years pushing the wheel of pain around. Although I was hearing that the wheel of pain apparently was so light and so easy to push that the first time Arnold pushed it, it spun around and hit him. So they had crew on the other side pushing to give him some resistance, but the wheel of pain was particularly easy to shove around.
In my mind's eye, I see like 100 people on one side pushing it, and Arnold by himself pushing it on the other because he's so strong. And he says in the commentary, "What are they making?" And he's like, "Grain." He's like, "Oh, they're grinding grain."
Yeah, Arnold gets a little preoccupied. He's like, "Oh, so where do they get the grain from? Where do they get?" He starts asking all these questions, and Milius is, you can tell, almost kind of confused as to why Arnold suddenly is so preoccupied with the actual business business model of the Wheel of Pain, but that's part of the delight of listening to the commentary is you actually get to see Arnold the person as opposed to Arnold the performer.
Another interesting thing about the commentary is that Arnold's unaware of all the scenes they cut from the U.S. release. So he's like, they cut that? And he's like, well, sure, that was in the European cut. But he's like, but you need that because it's not clear if you don't have the scene. And so it was pretty charming. I mean, it's really endearing. And I think he might be high as fuck.
To me, it seems like they've had maybe one or two drags and they're probably sipping on a glass of wine or whatever, but they definitely seem a little buzzed. They sound very relaxed. They're not smoking cigars and drinking coffee where they would be intense. They sound very chill.
Not quite Kurt Russell and John Carpenter, who are like cackling throughout all their commentaries, but still pretty close to it.
All right, well, I'm going to go through a couple more comments. Tristan Lofting says, I wasn't allowed to watch any Arnold movies until Twins came out. My mom had to take me without dad knowing. He hated Arnie. The only movies I've seen was The Villain. I was lucky where I was taken to see all Arnold movies from the time I was 5 onward, whether you're talking Commando or Terminator or Predator or Total Recall. I mean, by Total Recall, I was going on my own. I was 14. I just wandered on foot up to the movie theater to see it. But it was a special time to be a kid where just every once in a while he would find a filmmaker like Verhoeven or James Cameron or John Milius who really knew how to use him well. Arnold's made a lot of bad decisions in recent years where he's working with subpar filmmakers. One of the reasons we will never see a King Conan is that Terminator Genesis and Terminator Dark Fate were miserable failures. And the less said about those movies, the better. I fucking hate both those movies. And if those movies had at least have been hits, King Conan would still be on the table. Those movies bombed hard and lost. I think Dark Fate lost like $150 million, something ridiculous. So sadly, King Conan will never happen. But maybe, hopefully, at some point, we will get like an Amazon show or a Netflix show because The Witcher, which is obviously very different in tone. You're talking about Polish medieval fantasy instead of Robert E. Howard. But The Witcher was a monster hit for Netflix. People loved it. And it does have a similar dark kind of angle to it as opposed to family friendly. So the market and the audience is still there.
And let me jump in here really quick. By the way, if I don't mention that The Villain was directed by Hal Needham, Moose would be angry. But I want to answer a couple of these comments. They're asking, what about Red Sonja, which I think was also a De Laurentiis film, and Arnold was contractually obliged to appear in it, but he couldn't be Conan, right? He's like a guy that's like just like Conan. Am I correct?
He's not named Conan in it, and I saw it in the theater, and I remember being kind of confused because he looks like Conan, he's dressed like Conan, and the artwork he looks like Conan, but he's not Conan. But Red Sonja, it's best to see that when you're 8 or 9 years old in the theater, like I did, and then you'll have fun with it. I revisited when I did a video last year about my favorite 80s fantasy movies.
That was a good video.
And Red Sonja does not hold up particularly well. But obviously, Bridget Nielsen, or however you pronounce her name, she's one of my childhood crushes. I loved her in that. I loved her in Rocky IV. Just I was obsessed with her. So,
what about Beverly Hills Cop 2? She's mad hot. Really quick, Bill Scurry and and John Cripps both have good questions. What about Billy Smith as Conan's dad? He's great.
Pitch Perfect.
I love William Smith. I just saw him in Darker Than Amber, which is super good.
I mean, people talk about James Earl Jones and they talk about Max von Sydow, but Billy Smith, when he's giving his lecture to his son about the riddle of steel and about Crom, it's so mythic. You feel like you're sitting in Valhalla listening to all this wisdom being passed down. So maybe now's the time for a philosophical question because we get different points of view on what is the riddle of steel throughout the movie. Because Thulsa Doom obviously is really into steel as a young man, but later on he has a different attitude, and Conan's father's an attitude. Bill Teck, what is your interpretation? What is the riddle of steel? Because as Conan articulates to Subutai, when he dies, he has to go before Crom, and if he doesn't know the answer to the riddle of steel, Crom will laugh him out of Valhalla. Like, that is Crom, strong in his mountain. So how does Bill Teck avoid being cast out of Crom's mountain?
Well, number one, I know the secret, so I'm going to tell you guys. You haven't earned it the way I have, but I'll tell you anyway because I'm a benevolent barbarian, so I'm going to tell you. And the answer is in that quote that I said from Howard, which was just, there's always a way if desire be coupled with courage. So the answer is will. That's why there's a Nietzsche quote at the beginning of the movie, because it's not steel. Steel breaks. We see that. And it's not flesh because Conan beheads this motherfucker. It's will. That's what forges it, and that's the philosophy of the movie. And the movie's really true to its philosophy, and I love movies like that, where they're like, this is a fucked up way to think, but this is how the movie thinks.
But man, James Earl Jones makes such a compelling case. He's like, steel isn't strong. flesh is stronger. And then he has that girl. Dude, at the time, it was the highest free fall of any female stunt person in movie history. She drops like 200 feet down below. It's like, that's his power. He's such a compelling actor. It's hard not to get on Thulsa Doom's side at that point. I mean, like, if you asked me to join a snake death cult led by James Earl Jones, I'd have to at least think about it.
Oh, I'm ready to join up. That's why, thank God, they're not in the airports anymore.
Yeah, cult of personality. All right, John Chris made a donation. If you guys wrote a Conan story, what would the title be? Holy cow. I'm great at admiring great storytellers, but I'm not a great storyteller, so I couldn't even begin to think of one, but it would have to be this Conan the Destroyer and Conan the Barbarian are always taken. Conan the Conqueror wouldn't be it wouldn't be a bad way to go. King Conan. You got to keep it simple.
Well, I'm going to take John's thing as like those short story titles. So what I'm thinking is it would be something like I need like to throw a Latin thing in there somewhere. So it'd be something like The Robes of Ernesto or something like that.
Yeah, all of his titles are very simple. They're always things like Black Colossus or Red Nails and things like that. It's just incredible. Just like there's an elegant simplicity, but I love it when you can have simplicity that also has a lot of power. This is the way Stephen King described Robert E. Howard. He said, Howard's writing seems so highly charged with energy that it nearly gives off sparks. So you need a title that gives off sparks. And like, I mean, just little lines. He has this one line where he says, when Conan says, I live, I burn with life, I love, I slay, and I'm content. I mean, it's so simple. Those are all like one syllable words, but they have so much power.
What about Tobacco on the Mountaintop? I'm just trying, John. I'm trying, baby.
Conan, their Anvil of Crom. Tony Stellig, he gets the prize. Anvil of Crom.
That's awfully good.
That works. That 100% works. All righty. Well, let's dive into. We've gone through some commentary. We've gone through some movie, but I guess maybe now's the best time since we're getting toward the end of the hour. I mean, if people are in the chat want to keep talking, we'll keep going. But the goal is to do like a solid hour. Bill Teck, just favorite scenes from the movie, favorite moments. What are the movies? Because for me, the movie, as much as I love it, it's one of my all-time favorite movies. It is all over the place and inconsistent. And as you mentioned before, it's got this like chapter format where you've got great moments of narration by Mako as the wizard. But what for you screams out to you? Because for me, it's the visual storytelling, the absence of dialogue, the absence of traditional storytelling, just hearing voiceover narration with great, beautiful visual storytelling. Those are the sequences that scream out to me.
For me, my favorite scenes are the scenes that kind of give me the, get your hairs on your arms to stand up and stuff like that. And it's interesting because I like movies where the camera moves more generally, like a Scorsese or a Bogdanovich. He moves it subtly, but it's always moving. And John doesn't move the camera. It's just cutting. And in that regard, he reminds me of the wonderful directors of the 40s and 50s and even 30s. Like, its movement is in the editing. So I don't know if there are many camera moves in the movie, but I'm trying to think of any. There are some in the beginning when Thulsa Doom and his men are about to raid the village, where you see the Rottweilers with armor running through the woods, and the camera's following along, and it's just horses and that crazy jacked psycho, the skeleton running up with head. That fucking nut.
Yeah, hell is coming with those people.
My 4 favorite scenes are, number 1, when he's making love to the witch and she turns into the fireball or whatever, and he throws her into the fire. She flies around the room. That is the coolest thing. If there's something kind of erotic and sexy and wonderful.
There's some public screening where I think it was Arnold. He said, even for me, that doesn't happen every time.
He did say that. I think he says it in the comments. Yeah. That's just it's almost like a Frank Frazetta moment come to life, just like the Tree of Woe. Wow, that's like something I'd see in a painting. You don't see that in movies. Even an adult fantasy movie like Excalibur, it might have the guy boning in the night suit, but it doesn't have that scene, which is so sexy and crazy and weird. But my favorite scene, and one that chokes me up, is when Valeria appears. Spoiler alert, Valeria appears and says, and says something inspirational to Conan when he's about to get killed. And I love that scene. I find it super moving. You talk about relationship goals. I would like to have a Valkyrie like that. And I have had my share in as life partners, I'm always the guy that fucks it up. Maybe another day I'll have another Valeria, because she's so extraordinary in that scene where she comes back to help him out as a ghost or a spirit or whatever.
Yeah, that's the part of the movie where I am brought to tears when I'm watching it, because you've got Conan's prayer to Crom, which makes the hairs on my arm stand straight up like a million little erections. And then you've got this incredible battle with all John Milius's traps going off, and some of them really look like they were killing people. Like the one that comes around and I'm blanking on the goddamn, I always forget the actor's name.
Sven something, I don't remember.
Sven, who's like just one of the biggest. I mean,
he's friends with Arnold.
Yeah, everybody had to be bigger than Arnold though to be in this to seem like a legitimate threat. Sven Ole Thorson as Thorgrim, but when that thing goes through him, like you really feel it, and Arnold's kind of looking at him. But that whole battle scene, the music's perfect, the choreography's perfect, the swords look so heavy and so powerful, and then you have Valeria appearing. Do you want to live forever? And it's like, whoa! It's like this moment of beauty and calm, and then Arnold stands up, and there's really time to go to war and throw down against I'm blanking on Rexor by Ben Davidson, who was like a football player, just tall and giant. And that whole scene, that's the emotional peak of the movie for me.
I agree. And then also, I love when when they're sneaking in to steal the jewel, or I'm sorry, when they're breaking into the castle.
Yeah, when they climb the tower and go in, that feels straight out of Robert E. Howard. That feels like Tower of the Elephant all the way. They could easily turn it into a Tower of the Elephant scenario. It probably would have been a little weird having a space alien in the movie, because that's what the elephant is. I mean, you want to talk about how weird fiction was in the 20s and 30s. Like Tower of the Elephant pushes all those buttons. And then, of course, when they're sneaking into the mountain of power with the camouflage and the music and everything. But yeah, all those sequences where they're like in stealth mode and thief mode, because Conan, while he's a big motherfucker, he is a thief. I mean, he's a plunderer. And I love the idea of this giant, huge jack dude who is sneaky and quiet and so on and so forth. It's just such an interesting combination of flavors.
Agreed 100%. So those are my scenes when I don't like it because I feel bad for the mom, but it's a wonderful scene when they hack the way that's shot, where the slow motion and the head falls off to the side when they kill Conan's mom. That's powerful.
That really got to me at age 5, because when you're a kid, mothers are important. And I remember just sitting there and I was just completely destroyed when the Conan's looking at his hand and that's all that's left of her. And I just couldn't believe that the movie goes there. That really got me.
That's what's so sweet when he beheads Thulsa Doom at the end.
Yeah, but I love how Arnold, when he's watching it in the commentary, he probably mentions being hypnotized like 20 times. I think Arnold's really into hypnosis. He's like, oh, he's hypnotizing her. Yeah. And it's like, all right, well, maybe it's not hypnosis, but maybe it's something else. But Arnold just keeps saying that throughout the movie. Oh, he's hypnotizing.
That's funny. Well, there is something weird going on, because there's a little music there, and he does that freaky eye thing, that he does, and she's
he's got like respect and pity, but at the same time, he's coming for the steal. And this is not actually in the movie. You have to look really hard for, but apparently the line that's on the sword made by Conan's father, it says, "Suffer no guilt, ye who wield this in the name of Crom." I mean, that just tells you everything you need to know about the movie in terms of William Smith, Conan's father, everything about where he comes from. That's another complaint that a lot of people have, though, about the movie versus Robert E. Howard, is that Robert E. Howard, Conan lives amongst the Sumerians his entire life, and he opts out of his society and leaves to go explore the world, but he fully absorbs all of this culture. And that's how you get this great barbarism versus civilization theme that resonates throughout so many of his short stories. And a lot of the hardcore fans will say, well, if he's taken away as a child and he's raised on the wheel of pain and raised in these slave pits or during pit fighting, that's not necessarily like a barbarian. Like this idea of him, when he kind of looks at the guy freeing him with total confusion, for them, they think that's not true to the character. I agree that it's not true to Robert E. Howard, but I think it's true to this movie. It's true to the story that they're telling. And I feel like more than anything, as Adam Rakoff's fond of pointing out, you got to know what movie you're making. Like a movie, what's the best version of the movie you're making? What is the best version you can make? And I feel like everything about this movie, there's never a scene that feels hollow or that rings false or that feels like it doesn't fit. Everything's part of a greater whole. So it works for me as a movie, even if it is a departure from Robert E. Howard.
Well, I agree with that, and I've heard that pointed out as well. He's a slave in the movie. Conan was never a slave in the stories.
Yeah, Cole was, yeah.
Yeah, he's trained to fight in a dojo by martial artists. That's not something that happens in the books.
And that's the real life trainer. Like when Arnold and Sendell Bergman was training for the movie, they brought in a sword master to teach him everything. And so they're like, fuck it, put him in the movie. He's like, and kind of saying, but I love his little appearance.
Oh, it's terrific. He was not laughing for long.
Exactly.
But, you know, so those things are different. And some people argue, well, that makes him not a barbarian. That makes him a kind of trained person. Then he's brought books and he's taught to read and so forth.
He's more of a gladiator. Should be like Conan the Gladiator as opposed to Conan the Barbarian.
But I don't agree. I feel that, he's a barbarian. I mean, I don't know exactly what defines a barbarian, but pushing a fucking rock in the middle, a wheel in the middle of nowhere from like 5 to 18 and then beating people up for a living, that's a barbarian.
Also, he lives with his people until he's a teen. He's, however old he is at the beginning, 12, 13, with his father's teaching. He's absorbed his culture while his culture has to be kind of dormant while he's pushing the wheel of pain for as many years as he does. But he's still from that country. He still brings those values.
And the themes of religion that are throughout the movie, right? Real religion versus fake religion and so forth. He's kind of remembers, he's like a lapsed kind of guy. He kind of remembers a little something about Crom that he was taught, but he hasn't been able to really study it at all, but he sort of remembers it. Yeah, he's barbarous.
He knows enough about Crom that it's like, I seldom pray to him because he doesn't listen. So he understands Crom. And of course, if I have a favorite moment, when Arnold, I think the best acting of Arnold's life is when he says, Crom, I've never prayed you before. I have no tongue for it. And he goes into it. And now it ends with, and if you do not listen, then to hell with you. But it sums up everything about this philosophy of like almost like an existentialist philosophy where nobody's going to save you. Nobody's going to help you. The universe is indifferent. The universe is cold. The universe is merciless. So you have to carve whatever destiny that you wish to have. And I find that kind of gets to the essence of the character. And I found another great line about.
And if I may, while you look for that line, it calls right back to Howard, who used to say it was useless to call on Crom because he was such a gloomy, savage god, and he hated weaklings. But he gave a man courage at birth and the will and might to kill his enemies, which in the Sumerian's mind was all any god should be expected to do. That's from the first story, or not the first story, but the first kind of real official story.
Or Tower of the Elephant chronologically is the earliest story of Conan, even if it's not the first. I think in 1932, the very first one to get published was Phoenix on the Sword, which what I love is how Conan, the stories, they jump around different points in his life. Phoenix on the Sword, he's already a king. He's well into his life. And I love how we get to see these different chapters. And then Tower of the Elephant is like, oh, but now we're going to see him 40 years earlier, 30 years earlier. But Phoenix and the Sword, all the DNA, all the ingredients, they're all there. You've got Thothamon in there. You've got basically a giant like Lovecraftian monster that Conan has to kill with an enchanted blade. You've got people trying to betray him and tear down his kingdom. It's a short, sweet, intense little short story you can read in minutes, and it just punches you right in the face and makes you come back for more.
Absolutely. Oh, it's spectacular, but that's what it is. It's a callback to the original books and to Nietzsche. It's very true. That movie's very true to its.
All right, let's get some comments from the crowd. Victor Rodriguez says, "Yes, James, that's the answer to every writer who thinks they could write something better than what made it to the screen. It's about what best serves the project." Absolutely. It's not about your ego. It's about creating something bigger and better than yourself. Boom, boom, boom. Oh yeah. So Murat says they knew what they were doing by giving them multiple adjectives. In the movie poster, it reads thief, gladiator, barbarian, warrior, etc. I think it also even says thief. I mean, it says king as well. But he's a man of multitudes. So he's got multitudes contained within him. Bill Scurry asks, "Who's the better barbarian, Thundar or Conan?" What's interesting about Thundar is how it actually has a lot of similar DNA to Oliver Stone's script. That it's a post-apocalyptic landscape, and that's a concept that I think you could do anytime, anywhere. Post-apocalyptic, monsters and magic are coming back, and you just have a barbarian carving a trench through this new society. I would sign up for that anytime, anywhere. And right now in pop culture, I think Game of Thrones probably came the closest in terms of scratching that itch. And obviously The Witcher did a good job of scratching that itch. So I feel like there's a lust and hunger for more of these kinds of stories. It's a giant opportunity. And also, I'm a firm believer that not every movie or show needs to serve every audience equally. And Conan serves an underserved audience everything they could want and more. And anytime you make a movie or a show that satisfies that need that's been pent up, Make any topic, whether you're talking about Downton Abbey or Conan, there are niche audiences out there that are passionate about certain forms of storytelling. And I just feel like strong, smart, successful storytellers out there should recognize this opportunity that Conan is just screaming their name, but you can't do the 4-quadrant corporate made for the whole world Conan. You got to go after the diehards and just see who else gets on board.
That's right. And when there's not that many choices, people are going to go to it, even if there's some parts they're not okay with. It's definitely not a movie that's made by committee. It's definitely the work of one person. And that's why we're talking about it all these years later. And think about how many great blockbusters that we've enjoyed the hell out of. We're not going to be talking about them in 20 years or 30 years.
Yeah. No, storytelling by committee can yield you vast sums of money. There's no denying that. But as a fan of movies, as a fan of novels, as a fan of comics, I always like a strong singular vision, and I can either opt in or opt out depending upon my tastes and preferences. But I always I'm a rugged individualist when it comes to my creators, and I like storytellers that have a bold stance. And John Milius and Oliver Stone and Robert E. Howard and Arnold Schwarzenegger, these are all people with a very strong, unique flavor to them, and that's what makes it so special. But any remaining quotes in here? I saw you mention that you said that's a good question. What were you responding to?
I will tell you right now. I will read it to you right now. It was the question of whether Cimmerian had to do with. Does the name? It's from Murat. It says, does the name Cimmerian have anything to do with Cimarron, which R.E. Howard could have seen in a movie theater at this time?
He was taking like a field trip one day and found this like cold gray landscape that really inspired him. But he also has a lot of Irish heritage, so I know there's a lot of influences from like the Gauls. And but once again, I found this giant paragraph, and my knowledge of ancient civilization is pretty limited. But he was drawing upon a shitload of influences in terms of what made up the Cimmerian culture, but we don't really get a whole lot of it because Conan, everywhere he goes, he's like, I'm Conan, I'm a Cimmerian, but there are no stories in Cimmeria. So a lot of it's a great mystery, but for people who are more into anthropology and ancient civilization, that sort of thing, there are lengthy explanations about the influences that created Cimmeria, but I don't have the vocabulary or the knowledge right now to give a satisfactory answer.
Nor do I. I rarely do.
But Matthias just mentioned that he would love to see an animated version in the spirit of heavy metal. I mean, was it Korgoth of Barbarian? What was the cartoon from 2006, the pilot that never got made into a show? Korgoth of Barbarian from 2006. Yeah, the pilot's available on YouTube. It's played for laughs, but the laughs really work well if you love Conan. I mean, because Conan can be funny as hell when like he and Subutai are walking around town just shit-faced, and like Subutai's like, I am evil, and he's like, you all sluts, and punches a camel. I mean, there are times where the movie can be deliriously funny. Korgoth of Barbarian basically takes scenes like that and magnifies them by 1,000. But yeah, heavy metal can be funny as hell as well. Heavy metal absolutely deserves a mention in the same breath, and it comes from the same period. For whatever reason, due to Heavy Metal Magazine or Metal Hurlant, just sword and sandal, sword and sorcery, just tales of barbarism. They were in vogue in the 70s and early 80s. There's something special in the water. I think Ultra Kill Blast is in the chat. Hell yeah, Ultra Kill Blast, as I mentioned before in my past live stream.
I follow you guys big time.
He's my favorite Twitter profile when it comes to animation and stills and movie clips. His tastes are very much my own.
Yeah, that you rock, Ultra Kill Blast. As does everybody else in here who's been cool.
Absolutely. Bill Scurry says Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon's Punisher comics are as close as we have to Conan storytelling in the last 20 years. I think you're right on the money. I think I bought like 5 or 6 of those trade paperbacks. Perfect collaborators, a really singular, specific style of storytelling. And Steve Dillon, gone too soon. He was, obviously carved his teeth drawing Preacher, which is one of the great comic book sagas of all time. But man, that Garth Ennis, Steve Dillon run on Punisher is truly the stuff of legends. And while it's dark and bleak and violent, will make you shit your pants over and over and over again with laughter. It is just so much goddamn fun to read.
And see, Aaron, I don't dislike the Jason Momoa one, to answer your question. James, what are your thoughts on it? I don't dislike it. I didn't watch the end. I never got to watch the end because it was a long story. But what I watched, I didn't hate.
I think it's perfectly forgettable schlock that if it was the only Conan movie ever made, we'd be talking about the same way we would like the Van Helsing movie. It's like, oh, there's a Conan movie out there and so on and so forth. I think it does nothing to enrich or solidify or kind of curate or protect the reputation of Conan as a franchise, and also lost money. It was a wasted opportunity.
They didn't sell that movie right at all.
Yeah, when it comes to curation, it's a weird thing where it's like, do you try and preserve what's great and like lock it in amber, or do you build upon and try and take it in a new direction and risk alienating the fans? It's a very like thin tightrope to walk, and there's no perfect answer for it. But as I mentioned before, I think John Milius did manage to do that, where he brought in all of his influences that were important to him and then made it something new and different that still felt true to the original. But it's very hard to maintain a legacy franchise from many decades ago where it still feels true, but also feels new.
That makes perfect sense.
All right, so we've gone over an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. I just want to make sure I didn't overlook any remaining quotes. If anybody in here asked an awesome question that I totally overlooked just because I was talking my ear off from too much caffeine, please maybe rewrite it now or call attention to it. But I think I've seen most of the questions. But one thing, in terms of further reading going forward, I do want to read more Robert E. Howard stories that are not about Conan. I've never read any of the Cull. I've never read any Solomon Kane. I know he's got other characters that are very popular. I do read a lot of fantasy. Like right now, I'm on the final book of the Wheel of Time series right now. I'm looking forward to getting back into Joe Abercrombie later this year. So I'm always on the lookout for great, dark adult fantasy and that sort of thing. And I feel like Robert E. Howard, and I still have a few Conan stories left by Robert E. Howard to read as well.
And I'm open. If you want to suggest something for me to read, I would love it. I wanted to address Tony's comment about Ron Cobb. The production design, we didn't go too heavy on that. It is legitimately one of the great production
design. The mountain of power,
in history.
Yeah, it's everything you want a pagan death cult devoted to snakes to be.
Is that era the top of production design in Hollywood with the Dick Seiberts and people like that working at that time? I mean, Ron Cobb was a savage, and I don't think anybody really let him go the way Milius did, because Milius is crazy. They
built that thing. They had 1,500 extras, and they built the tower that they scale to go into to look for the eye of the snake or the eye of the serpent or whatever it is. It's Claren O'Donovan says Solomon Kane is brilliant. Claren, do you have a specific Solomon Kane story that is good to start with, or is it better just to go sequentially? Because I know Solomon Kane, obviously it's not medieval. It's like late 1600s, early 1700s, but it's been on my to-do list for a long time. But anytime somebody recommends fiction from like the Edgar Rice Burroughs era or the Lovecraftian era or the Robert E. Howard era, I love all this like kind of early genre fiction from the early part of the 20th century, because they operated by a different code of conduct back then, and they did not tap the brakes ever.
No, they didn't. No, they did not.
Nor did John Milius. Well, where can people find you online if they want to talk more about any of the above mentioned topics? Where can people find your movies that you've made? Give us the Bill Teck essentials before we wrap this sucker up.
Our movie was on Netflix forever, but the contract ended, so we'll try to get that back on Netflix. In the meantime, people can watch it on iTunes or Amazon or whatever. You can rent it for a couple $bucks, or you can buy it if you want. You can buy the DVD from Warner Brothers. It's beautiful. It's all about Peter Bogdanovich. I'm very proud of it. People can find me at Bill Teck, Billteck, without the exclamation point that I put on my little thing there on the screen, because I thought that would be fun. Like Wham! UK. That's an 80s reference, James. They used to have an exclamation point at the end of their name. But people can find me there at Bill Teck and talk about anything y'all want.
Beautiful. Well, if anybody wants to talk to me, you can find me on Twitter at Colbrax. And also, like 90% of the people in here are also on Twitter. Robert O'Mara, Irish filmmaker, he just popped in. We did a giant podcast recently about the last 30 years of Irish cinema, which was a ton of fun.
That was a great one.
So shout out to Eleanor Tonarelli, if that's how you say it, but Robert McCammon, the Matthew Corbett series. Actually, that's the first I've heard of it, but I will definitely look it up.
Thank you for all these great recommendations.
Absolutely. And also Stevan Daljev, if I'm saying that correctly, says Little Heaven by Nick Cutter is a great, gory, supernatural action, not sword and fantasy, though. I mean, for me, I'm just always looking on the lookout for great storytellers in any genre for any era. And if it's got a little something extra going on behind the scenes, so much the better. But I'm just, in the end, storytelling is my life. Oh, excuse me, James. What will you be tackling on the next live stream from Pete 1972? That's an excellent question. Nothing is on the calendar. It can be anything. I'm trying to lure Tony Stella in to talk about the Sean Connery era of James Bond. But in terms of more contemporary subjects, I'm willing to talk about anything. I would love to get Martin Kessler in one day to talk about the Dark Souls franchise and what to expect from future From Software games. But it can be anything. So people can reach out to me on Twitter and make suggestions. And I try to always find something that is relevant to shows that might get made or movies that might get made or something that's kind of connected to pop culture now. Because if I just do an episode about like Howard Hawks and my favorite Howard Hawks movies, that's cool for film history and that sort of thing, but that's probably more appropriate for the podcast. With YouTube, I try to tie it into something that's more kind of active and ongoing in pop culture. But I'm open to any and all suggestions when it comes to future live streams because we're all locked up in our homes right now. The goal is to do a hell of a lot more live streams because I'm fucking lonely and I want to talk to my friends. This is the way to hang out with everybody.
Very cool, man. This is a treat for me, and I'm also locked up and enjoying it. I do want to make a comment about my sartorial choices. I'm not in my pajamas. It looks like pajamas, but it's not pajamas. It's like a weird Jimmy Buffett branded Margaritaville hoodie.
How do I get traps like Bill Teck?
Cunnilingus.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So thanks so everybody for showing up. This has been an absolute blast. Keep the suggestions coming when it comes to reading and or future live streams. But the goal is to do a hell of a lot more of these. So Bill had an absolute blast talking about this. I feel like we could have easily gone for 10 hours, but just in the interest of a tight economical format, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this sucker up. So once again, thanks everybody. Please subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell to get future content from this channel. But Eleanor, thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you so much for all the donations. You guys were incredibly generous, far more so than I would have ever dreamed of. So I'll see you guys in the very near future. Talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye. All right, ending the broadcast. Whoops, sorry. Nope, it's not. Wait, the button didn't end. Now it's ending. Boom, boom.